Hi everyone, welcome back to our Fishing Lakes apiaries, where today we're going to take a look at a colony that we've looked at before, where we took several nucleus colonies that we'd removed our queens from to help with other queenless colonies and then united them, and they developed really well to the point that we had to start putting supers on them. And we're now heading very quickly towards the end of July, and you may be able to see over my shoulder the brambles have pretty much finished flowering. We've got blackberries that are almost ready for picking, although they do taste a little bit sour at the moment, probably a lack of sunshine. But for us here at the Fishing Lakes, that's pretty much it in terms of forage. We don't have any late forage past the end of July normally, so we need to start checking to see whether supers need to come off, see whether they're ready to come off, and then we can get those extracted. So let's take the camera through, have a look at this colony, see how they're developed, and see whether these supers are ready to come off using clearer boards and head back to the honey room. Well, this is our colony, and you can probably see that we've got our roof. There's an integrated feeder, integral feeder here, and then we've got our two supers. There's a queen excluder between the bottom super and the brood box, and then we've got our brood box and floor beneath that. So if you've watched any of the videos on our Patreon page, you'll be familiar with this colony. It's one that we've inspected on several occasions, and one that we've followed as we've kind of built it up from just a single queen cell early in the spring, when unfortunately we struggled with quite a number of swarms. But we'll have a look through and see how they're getting on. I do think that they're obviously starting to get a little bit grumpy with the lack of forage. They don't want anyone stealing their stores. We'll have a look in the brood box first, just make sure that they're queen right, and then we'll have a look at the supers as we put them back on, and then plan to maybe take off the supers in a week or two. Now sometimes you'll find that the frames get stuck to the box beneath it, so just be careful as you're taking them off. Stand up for this and lift it across. So it looks like this top box is pretty well full. Still a few cells, and I think this box, when we put it on, was actually a foundation. So we do have quite a bit of drawn comb, but they do still have a certain amount of open cells within each of those frames. So maybe this one we won't take. We might leave this frame, we might leave this super for stores for the winter. Plenty of bees still, which is great. Let's have a look through the brood box, make sure that they're queen right. A quick look on the underside of the queen excluder just to see if we can spot the queen. Doesn't appear to be there, and then we can work our way through. So as I mentioned, we have shown this particular colony right from the point at which we split it from a colony that swarmed. So if you'd like to check out the full story of this particular colony, then do have a look at our Patreon page, which has got several videos featuring this and lots of our other colonies throughout this season. We are just about to take bees to the heather moors to try and get a crop of heather honey, and that will happen at the beginning of August, so not long. So if you'd like to watch the videos of our heather honey adventure, then check out our Patreon page where you'll be able to watch all of those videos. So here we've got a frame of brood, a pretty full frame of brood. It's all looking really healthy, and I suspect this is all about to emerge, so that's good news. And I'll take this inspection fairly slow so that I can show you each of the frames. Now these two frames that I'm looking at the moment are frames that don't have spacers on them, so you have to be a little bit careful when we're putting them back. And actually what we're trying to do is to move them to the outside so that we can replace them. But this frame has brood in all stages. You can see some sealed brood at the bottom here, but actually all the way around it we've got brood at various stages, all the way from eggs. In fact, I'm just double checking, but yeah, we've got eggs in some of the cells at the top section over here, all the way down to fairly well advanced larvae. So looking good, looking healthy. The queen's still laying, and we've got well, if we've got some forage for them, then maybe they'll continue filling up the bottom of those two supers, but we are pretty much at the end of the nectar flow for these bees. So if we don't find ourselves with that super filling up over the next week, maybe week to 10 days, then I think we'll leave it with the bees as overwintered stores. So with that in mind, what I'm also looking at now are these brood frames to see whether there's any food in the top corners, and that's generally where they'll put their food stores. So if you look when you're inspecting at these top kind of triangular quadrant areas, that's where the food is likely to be, and this frame has no food in it at all. That's all brood. So part of my thought process in now planning as we kind of move forward towards the autumn is, have I got enough food here for these bees, and if not, do I need to keep something behind in these supers in order to feed them and not have the colony starve? So that's a really important factor in what I'm kind of assessing in this inspection. Again, lots more brood. This frame actually has quite a lot of pollen as well, so where you can see all of the open frames down the side, these are all mostly filled with pollen, so they've got quite a lot of their proteins packed away in the brood nest area, just not the honey, the carbohydrates that they will want as they head through the autumn and into winter. And this apiary site is very much a bramble apiary. Once the brambles finish flowering, we don't generally tend to find a great deal of other food for them. Now there's our queen. Again, not looking for the queen, and isn't it always the case that when you're not looking for the queen, you spot her quite easily, but when you need to find her, she puts on that cloaking device. So she's wandering along the bottom of this frame, just about to head round the bottom of the frame. So we know to just be a little bit more cautious with this frame, but lots of brood, lots of eggs, and this frame's looking fully loaded, ready to produce autumn bees. So this is a 10 frame Langstroth hive, for those of you that are unfamiliar with it. It's a techno set hive, one that we've run for a few years now to good effect. And we now only really use Langstroth hives. Honeypore hives are probably my favourite, undoubtedly my favourite, and we use those as production hives elsewhere. Again, lots of eggs. The brood has emerged and continues to emerge around the edges, and the queen is laying in here again. So yeah, the honeypore hives are my favourite, and that's what we will tend to use more than anything else. So 3 frames to go. Looks like we've got a lot of bees in here still. So if there is any forage out there, then hopefully they're finding it and able to bring that back into the supers. And if you're watching this video and haven't been looking at each individual frame, then it's worth just rewinding and having a look at this top section of each of the frames, and you will see we have absolutely no food in them at all. So I'm definitely not going to be taking that second super of honey off them. I'm going to leave that bottom box, because although these bees are producing some fantastic looking brood, they're just not storing anything in the brood box. And although we have got 1 frame of food on the outside, and I suspect the final frame that we've got here, this outside frame, is probably food stores as well, it's really important that we leave them with enough food so that they can overwinter quite happily. So final frame of worker brood. Minimal amount of food stores in this. You can see maybe the difference along this top edge. We've got a very small amount of food going in here. Now we could leave the bees until the ivy comes into flower, and then they will backfill with ivy. But actually ivy can be problematic for some colonies because it granulates so very quickly and so firmly that sometimes the bees can't actually utilise the ivy. Not all, but just some colonies. And then finally, our end frame, which, as I suspected, is full of food. So we've got 2 frames of food. I'd probably like to see 4 frames of food in the brood box for these bees going into the winter. So we'll give them another couple of weeks, and then we can turn it over. There's a little bit of drone brood here. We'll assess them again in a couple of weeks' time, and maybe that's when we'll take the super off. So that's our brood box inspection complete. Now, I mentioned these 2 frames at this end, which come from a different type of hive, and they don't have the spacers on, so you have to be a little bit careful when you're moving the frames so that you don't push these 2 frames together. And these frames need to come out and be replaced with frames that have the spacers with them. So we just push that one quite close together, and then I can deal with this final frame. And I don't want to push this in with all these bees on, because that will crush the bees against the sidewall. So we'll shake them off. We know that the queen is already in here, so we can shake them off, and then we can pop this frame back in. There's not a huge amount of food in this frame, lots of pollen, but in terms of carbohydrate stores, it's not a massive frame of food. So that kind of, in my mind, that reinforces the fact that I'll probably leave this other super on there with all of the honey on it. So we'll shake the bees off the queen excluder. I'm just going to scrape off the comb that's on the queen excluder, and we can take that away and pop that in our bucket for rendering. That can go back on. We'll pop the queen excluder back on. Just wiggle it on so that we don't crush bees, and then lift on our super. Not a huge amount of weight in this particular super. Make sure that's on nice and square. And then I'm just going to scrape off the comb on the top, a little bit of smoke across the top just to drive the bees off, and then we can cut this off. Now the comb in here is, the frames are not exactly square, so we can work our way through and just straighten those up, but I'll show you what happens when you find that a couple of frames are a bit misaligned. You end up with this situation. So if I split these apart, because they weren't tightly packed, you end up with comb being built in between the frames, as we've got here, and that can become problematic, certainly when you come to take a frame out for extraction. So we'll cut that away, and then I'm going to put this frame right to the edge, facing the side wall of the super. Shake the bees off the bottom of that, and then I can put that in tight against the side wall, and then we've got this next frame which also has a slight oddly drawn section where the bees have come in and just drawn it, to be honest, how they want to draw it, how they want to fill that space. So it's not down to the bees, it's down to the beekeeper. So we'll pop that one in next to it, and just looking at the food that they're storing, if you shake it, you can see that the nectar's dripping out, so that's not ready to come off and be extracted as yet. So we've got 9 frames in here, so 9 super frames, and that's why the spacing is a little bit off. With foundation we'd probably put 10 frames in to start with, but it looks as if this one was a 9 frame, and again this pairing has been kind of joined together. In fact, it's been joined together to the next frame as well. So we've got a couple of options here. We could leave it, but I want to show you what happens, so we'll take this out. So we've got this kind of odd comb structure. So that's just, I've just been stung on the finger, that's just where it's been too far from the other frame, and the bees have decided to connect the two. So let's just pop this one down in front of the hive, and I can show you the next one. And then we're back into a fairly evenly drawn comb, and then on the other side. I'm just cutting away the brace comb that's been formed at the bottom, but that will probably get rejoined, so sometimes it's actually not worth pulling it around. It's just probably best just to leave it for the bees to do what the bees do, and then actually when it comes to extracting it, that's the point at which to do all the remedial work. So last 3 frames, and you can see that they're drawn. This one, the central area of the frame has actually been left as if the queen was going to come up to lay eggs into it, but because the queen excluder is in place, she's not able to, and so they would, if we had a nectar source, fill that with honey, but because we are at the end of the season, it's possible that that will be left open. So I don't think we'll do anything else with this particular box of drawn super frames. We'll leave the bees to do their own thing with it, and it will probably get filled with ivy, but I think we can certainly extract the next frame, the next super box with frames in. So I'm just going to pop this frame back in its position, shake these bees off so that we don't end up crushing them, and you can see the odd way the comb has been drawn. So we'll pop that back in, and I'm just going to leave that as it is, and then we'll move these frames back into position and the bees can just do their own thing with it. Okay, so on to our final box, which is really a bonus because we've got a super that has come about from nucleus colonies that have been combined. So I guess we wouldn't perhaps have expected to have got this box full of honey, but let's show you just a couple of frames out of the middle. That's quite heavy, as you can probably tell. So you just mind those bees on the corner there. That's all of those bees gently brushed out of the way and not crushed. If you put the box straight back down, then it has a tendency to crush the bees. A little bit of smoke across the top, and let's take out maybe 2 of these frames. I'm just looking down to see what we've got here. It's quite a light coloured honey that's gone into these frames. If I shake it, bees drop off, but actually none of the honey is dripping out, so this is ready to be extracted. And then let's have a look at the one next to it. So this one actually has got some, again, got some odd comb attached to it. So we'll just lift that up and you can see where the bees have created their own little area which is attached to the frame next to it. So I'm not going to take that one out, but again it's mostly capped off, quite light honey. Same on this side. If we give it a bit of a shake, nothing dripping out of it, so that could all be extracted. So we could, if we wanted to, extract this by popping a clearer board on and removing this box at any time now, but we'll probably give them another week before we do that. So let's just get rid of this, move that to our pile. Just a little bit of smoke just to chase these bees away from the top edge, and then we can get the feeder and roof back on and let them carry on about their work. So that's a really pleasing result from several nucleus colonies that we've united with a queen-right nucleus colony, added a super and then a second super. Interesting to see that the brood nest area is devoid of a lot of food, and it's really important that at this time of the year, when you're going through your hive, that you do take a look at what food stores the bees have in their brood box before removing all of the supers and taking the honey away from them, because you don't want the colony to starve prior to, if you're treating bees, treatments and then subsequently feeding your colonies. But do take a look at our other videos on our Patreon page, patreon.com/Norfolk Honey, where we've got lots more videos to share with you, including our podcast. And if not, we'll catch up next time. Thanks for watching.